I still remember the exact words she used. They're burned into my memory like a brand on my soul. You're just not ambitious enough for me, David. I need someone who's going places, someone with drive. The way she said it, so matter of fact, like she was commenting on the weather. Like she wasn't destroying 5 years of my life with a single sentence. It was a Thursday evening in our cramped studio apartment. I was sprawled on our secondhand couch, still in my work clothes from my job at the accounting firm, eating leftover Chinese takeout while watching some mindless TV show. She walked out of the bathroom, hair still damp from her shower, wearing that red dress I'd bought her for her birthday. The one that made her eyes look like emeralds. "We need to talk," she said, and those 4 words made my stomach drop. I muted the TV and sat up straighter, suddenly very aware of the soy sauce stain on my shirt and the fact that I hadn't shaved in 2 days. "What's wrong, Sarah?" I asked, though part of me already knew. She'd been distant for weeks, taking calls she wouldn't explain, staying late at her marketing job more often than usual. I'd been telling myself it was just stress, that we'd work through it like we always did. She sat down on the edge of the coffee table facing me, but not quite meeting my eyes. "David, I've been thinking about us, about our future, about what I want in life." My heart started racing. "Okay," I said slowly, setting down my chopsticks. "What about it?" "I'm 27 years old. I want to travel the world, experience luxury, build something meaningful. I want to be with someone who shares those ambitions, who has the drive to make those dreams happen. I have dreams too," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, they sounded weak. "I'm working on getting my CPA certification. I'm saving money. We talked about maybe buying a house in a few years." "A house in the suburbs?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David, I'm talking about real ambition. About building wealth, about making a mark on the world. When was the last time you took a risk? When was the last time you pushed yourself beyond your comfort zone?" I stared at her, feeling something cold spreading through my chest. I thought we were happy. I thought we wanted the same things. I thought so too for a while, but I've been offered a position at a firm in Manhattan. It's a huge opportunity, and I'm gonna take it. I'm moving next month. "Next month?" The words came out as a whisper. "Sarah, we can work this out. If you want to move to New York, we can move to New York. I can find a job there." "No." She finally looked at me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. Not sadness, not regret. Relief. "David, you're a good man. You're kind, you're stable, you're reliable. But you're not ambitious enough for me. I need someone who's going places, someone with drive." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. 5 years. 5 years of building a life together, of late-night conversations about our future, of believing we were partners in everything. "Is there someone else?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. She hesitated for just a moment, and that hesitation told me everything. "It's not about someone else, David. It's about me, about what I need in my life." But I could see it now, the way she'd been glowing lately, the new confidence in her step, the expensive handbag she'd claimed was a work gift, the way she'd started wearing makeup to the grocery store. "Who is he?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "David, please. Who is he, Sarah?" She sighed, running her hands through her still damp hair. "His name is Marcus. He's a client at the firm. He's successful. He has vision, ambition. He's going to help me get set up in New York." Marcus. Even his name sounded expensive, polished. I pictured him in a tailored suit, driving a BMW, the kind of man who commanded respect just by walking into a room. "How long?" I asked. 2 months, she said quietly. "But David, it's not what you think. We've just been talking. About business, about opportunities." It made me realize what I was missing. 2 months. For 2 months, she'd been living a double life, planning her escape while I came home every night, thinking everything was fine. While I was saving money for our future, she was preparing to abandon it. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. "I need some air," I said. "David, wait. Let's talk about this." But I was already grabbing my jacket, my keys, walking toward the door. I couldn't look at her anymore. Couldn't stay in that apartment that suddenly felt like a mausoleum of our dead relationship. I drove aimlessly for hours, windows down, music turned up loud enough to drown out my thoughts. But they kept circling back to the same thing. I wasn't ambitious enough. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't the kind of man who could give her the life she wanted. When I finally came back to the apartment, it was after midnight. Sarah was asleep, curled up on her side of the bed like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, memorizing the curve of her shoulder, the way her hair fell across the pillow. I slept on the couch that night, and the next night, and the night after that. We moved around each other like polite strangers, dividing up 5 years of accumulated life with surgical precision. She took the good coffee maker, the expensive sheets, the framed photos of our trips. I kept the second-hand furniture, the mismatched dishes, the weight of her words crushing my chest every time I drew breath. The day she left, I took time off work to help her load her things into the moving truck. She was wearing that red dress again, the one that used to make my heart skip. Now it just made me feel hollow. "I'm sorry, David," she said as she handed me back the key to our apartment. "I really am. You're going to find someone who appreciates what you have to offer." I wanted to tell her that I didn't want someone else. I wanted to tell her that I'd change, that I'd become the ambitious man she needed me to be. But the words stuck in my throat, and she was already walking away, her heels clicking against the pavement with the same finality as a judge's gavel. I watched the moving truck disappear around the corner, taking with it the only woman I'd ever loved and the future I thought we were building together. Then I went back inside, sat on my couch in the too quiet apartment, and let myself break apart. For the first month, I was a ghost. I went through the motions of living, work, sleep, eat, repeat, but I felt like I was watching my life from outside my body. My coworkers noticed, of course. They'd ask if I was okay, if I wanted to grab drinks after work, if I needed to talk. I'd smile and make excuses, but the truth was I couldn't bear the thought of explaining what had happened. How do you tell people that the woman you loved left you because you weren't ambitious enough? How do you admit that you'd been found lacking in the most fundamental way? I started staying late at the office, not because I had more work to do, but because going home meant facing the empty apartment, the silence, the constant reminder of what I'd lost. I'd sit at my desk, staring at spreadsheets, wondering what Marcus had that I didn't. What ambition looked like when it wasn't wrapped in the mundane routine of a middle-class life. It was during one of these late nights that I stumbled across an article about cryptocurrency. Bitcoin had been making headlines, and while most people dismissed it as a fad, something about the technology fascinated me. I started reading everything I could find. White papers, technical analyses, forums where early adopters discussed the potential of blockchain technology. For the first time in months, I felt something other than numbness. It was curiosity, maybe even excitement. This was new territory, uncharted waters where traditional rules didn't apply, where someone like me, someone willing to dig deep, to understand the fundamentals, might actually have an advantage. I started small. I took $1,000 from my savings account and bought Bitcoin when it was trading at $200 per coin. My hands shook as I made the transaction, not from fear of losing the money, but from the thrill of finally taking a risk, of doing something that Sarah's Marcus would never have seen coming. The price fluctuated wildly in those early days. Some nights I'd go to bed with my investment up 20%, others I'd watch it drop by half. But instead of panicking, I found myself analyzing the patterns, studying the market forces that drove the volatility. I started to understand that this wasn't just about money. It was about being part of something revolutionary, something that would change the world. I began putting more money into crypto, not recklessly, but strategically. I researched emerging altcoins, studied the teams behind them, evaluated their technology and market potential. I diversified my portfolio, spreading risk across different projects while keeping a core position in Bitcoin and Ethereum. Months passed. The grief began to fade, replaced by something harder, more focused. I started working out, not to impress anyone, but because I needed an outlet for the energy that was building inside me. I read voraciously, not just about cryptocurrency, but about business strategy, psychology, wealth building. I was becoming a student of success, analyzing what separated the winners from the losers. 6 months after Sarah left, I got a promotion at the accounting firm. It came with a modest raise in a small office with a window. My old self would have been satisfied with that, would have seen it as validation of my steady, reliable approach to life. But now I saw it for what it was, a golden cage, a comfortable prison that would keep me exactly where I was forever. I started thinking about Sarah more strategically during this time, not with the raw, desperate longing of those first months, but with a cold calculation that surprised me. I wondered where she was, what she was doing, whether she ever thought about me. I found myself imagining scenarios where our paths would cross again, where she'd see what I'd become and realize what she'd given up. It wasn't healthy, I knew that, but it was fuel. Every time I felt like playing it safe, like settling for incremental progress, I'd remember the look in her eyes when she told me I wasn't ambitious enough. I'd remember Marcus with his expensive suits and his vision and his ability to give her everything I couldn't. The cryptocurrency market exploded in late 2017. My portfolio, which had grown steadily over the months, suddenly multiplied by 10, then 20. I watched the numbers climb on my phone screen, hardly believing what I was seeing. The $1,000 I'd invested had become $50,000, then $100,000. Friends and family started asking me about Bitcoin, wanting to know how to get in on the action. But I didn't tell them about my real success. I downplayed it, made it sound like I'd gotten lucky with a small investment. Because I was starting to understand something that Sarah and Marcus would never grasp. True wealth wasn't about showing off. It was about having options, about having the power to choose your own path. I quit my job at the accounting firm on a Tuesday morning in January. My boss was shocked, offering me another promotion, a raise, whatever it would take to keep me. But I'd already made my decision. I was going to start my own consulting firm, specializing in helping businesses understand and implement blockchain technology. The first year was brutal. I worked 18-hour days, lived on coffee and determination, taught myself everything I could about business development and client management. I made mistakes, lost potential clients, had moments where I questioned whether I'd made the right choice, but I kept going, driven by something deeper than ambition, by the need to prove that I was capable of more than anyone had ever imagined. My breakthrough came when I landed a contract with a Fortune 500 company that wanted to explore blockchain applications in their supply chain. The project was worth more than I'd made in 2 years at the accounting firm, and it led to other opportunities, bigger contracts, a growing reputation in the industry. I hired my first employee, then a second, then a team. I moved the company from my apartment to a real office, then to a larger space, then to a suite in one of the most prestigious buildings in the city. I learned to wear expensive suits, to speak the language of power, to command respect in rooms full of executives who would have dismissed me 5 years earlier. And through it all, I never forgot the lesson Sarah had taught me. Ambition wasn't just about wanting more. It was about being willing to do whatever it took to get it. About transforming yourself so completely that your old life became unrecognizable. I started investing in other businesses, using my cryptocurrency profits to fund startups and acquire assets. I bought rental properties, invested in stocks, diversified my portfolio across every major asset class. I studied the wealthy, learned their strategies, adopted their mindsets. I became the kind of man who could walk into any room and know that I belonged there. But success brought its own challenges. The loneliness was constant, a low-level ache that never quite went away. I dated, of course, beautiful women who were attracted to my success, my confidence, my ability to give them the lifestyle they wanted, but none of them lasted. Maybe because I couldn't stop comparing them to Sarah, or maybe because I couldn't let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. I thought about reaching out to her sometimes late at night when the silence in my penthouse apartment became too much to bear. I'd draft messages I never sent, look at her social media profiles I'd promised myself I wouldn't check. I could see glimpses of her life in New York, photos from expensive restaurants, vacations to exotic locations, the kind of life she'd always wanted. She looked happy. That was what hurt the most. She'd made the right choice, at least from her perspective. She'd traded up, found the ambitious man she'd been looking for, built the life she'd dreamed of, and I was just a footnote in her story. A cautionary tale about settling for less than you deserve. By year 3, my company was worth 8 figures. I had offices in 3 cities, a team of 40 employees, and a client roster that read like a who's who of corporate America. I was speaking at conferences, being interviewed by business publications, being recognized as a thought leader in the blockchain space. I bought my first luxury car, a Porsche 911 Turbo S, not because I needed it, but because I could. Because I wanted to feel the power of something that had been built without compromise, without settling for good enough. I bought a house in the hills with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the entire city. I hired a personal trainer, a chef, a housekeeper. I created a life that was everything I'd never dared to dream of. But I still felt empty. Success, I was learning, was a drug that required ever-increasing doses to maintain the same high. Every achievement felt hollow without someone to share it with. Every milestone was just another reminder of what I'd lost. It was during this period that I started planning what would become my masterpiece of revenge. Not revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't going to hurt Sarah or try to destroy her life, but I was going to show her, in the most dramatic way possible, exactly what she'd walked away from. I hired a private investigator to find out where she was living, what she was doing, whether she was still with Marcus. The report came back 3 weeks later, and it was everything I'd expected and feared. She was living in a luxury apartment in Manhattan, working as a senior marketing director at a prestigious firm. She'd married Marcus the year before, and they were apparently very happy together. Marcus, it turned out, was everything I'd imagined and more. He was a hedge fund manager with a net worth in the low 8 figures, a reputation for ruthless efficiency, and a lifestyle that screamed success. He drove a Maserati, owned a house in the Hamptons, and was known for his expensive taste in everything from wine to watches. But here's what the investigators' report also revealed. Marcus's success was built on other people's money. He was good at what he did, but he was essentially a well-paid employee with a fancy title. He'd never built anything from scratch, never taken the kind of risks that create real wealth. He was successful, but he wasn't truly ambitious. He was playing it safe in an expensive suit. And that's when I knew exactly how I was going to show Sarah what she'd given up. Not through a confrontation or a dramatic gesture, but through a demonstration of the kind of power that Marcus could never understand. The kind of power that comes from building something from nothing, from turning vision into reality. I was going to buy a private jet. Not lease one, not charter one for a day, but buy one outright. A Gulfstream G650, the kind of aircraft that only the truly wealthy could afford. The kind of statement that would make Marcus's hedge fund salary look like pocket change. The planning took months. I had to restructure my investments, liquidate some assets, and arrange financing for the purchase. But by year 4, I was sitting in the showroom of a private aviation dealer, writing a check for $65 million like it was a car payment. The jet was everything I dreamed of and more. Custom leather interior, state-of-the-art avionics, a range that could take me anywhere in the world without stopping to refuel. But more than that, it was a symbol, a physical representation of what ambition could accomplish when it was coupled with intelligence, determination, and the willingness to risk everything for the chance at something extraordinary. I spent the next year learning to fly it myself. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because I wanted to understand every aspect of what I'd built, to be in complete control of my own destiny. I earned my pilot's license, logged hundreds of hours of flight time, and became as comfortable in the cockpit as I was in the boardroom. And then, 5 years to the day after Sarah had walked out of my life, I decided it was time to make my grand gesture. I'd learned that she and Marcus were getting married. Again, apparently, in a destination wedding on the Caribbean island where they'd first met. A lavish affair that would cost more than most people made in a year. I could have crashed the wedding, made a scene, turned their special day into a spectacle. But that would have been crude, desperate, the kind of thing the old David might have done. Instead, I chose a different approach. I was going to show up in the most elegant way possible, at the most unexpected moment, and let my presence speak for itself. I filed a flight plan for the island, arranged for ground transportation, and prepared for what would either be the most satisfying moment of my life or the most humiliating. Because there was always the chance that Sarah wouldn't care, that she'd look at my jet and my success and feel nothing but mild curiosity about what her ex-boyfriend had been up to. But I had to know. I had to see her face when she realized who I'd become. I had to show her that the man she'd dismissed as unambitious had built something that her husband, for all his polish and connections, could never match. The flight to the Caribbean took 4 hours. I flew alone, my hands steady on the controls, my mind focused on the upcoming encounter. I'd rehearsed what I would say, how I would act, but I knew that the moment I saw her, all of that preparation might go out the window. I landed at the small airport on the island just as the sun was setting. The Gulfstream drew stares from the ground crew, the kind of attention that comes with owning something truly extraordinary. I taxied to the private aviation terminal, shut down the engines, and sat in the cockpit for a long moment, gathering my thoughts. This was it. 5 years of planning, of building, of becoming the man Sarah had said I could never be. In a few hours, I would see her again, and she would see what she'd walked away from. She would understand finally what ambition really looked like. I climbed out of the jet and walked toward the terminal, my footsteps echoing across the tarmac. The warm Caribbean air felt different on my skin, charged with possibility and the promise of long-awaited vindication. I thought about the boy I'd been when Sarah left me, broken and doubting everything about himself. He felt like a stranger now, someone I'd known in another life. The hotel where the wedding was taking place was a 5-star resort, the kind of place where celebrities went to avoid the paparazzi. I'd booked a suite there months in advance, not because I planned to stay the night, but because I wanted to be able to walk through the lobby like I belonged there, like I was just another wealthy guest enjoying a Caribbean vacation. I checked in, changed into a custom-tailored suit, and made my way to the hotel bar. The wedding reception was scheduled to start in an hour, and I knew that's where I'd find her, where I'd finally get to deliver the message I'd been preparing for 5 years. The bar was elegant, understated, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the ocean. I ordered a whiskey, the kind that cost more per shot than I used to spend on dinner, and waited. My hands were steady, my breathing calm, but inside I felt like a coiled spring ready to release. And then I saw her. She was walking across the lobby with Marcus, both of them dressed in wedding attire that probably cost more than my old monthly salary. She looked exactly as I remembered. The same green eyes, the same confident stride, the same way of holding herself that had first attracted me all those years ago. But she also looked different. Older, obviously, but also harder somehow. Success had changed her, just as it had changed me. She moved through the world like someone who was used to getting what she wanted, who had learned to navigate the corridors of power with grace and determination. Marcus was everything I'd expected. Tall, handsome in a conventional way, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to prove yourself. He was the kind of man who'd been successful his entire life, who'd never known what it felt like to be dismissed as not good enough. They didn't see me at first. I watched them from across the lobby, taking in every detail, every gesture, every interaction. They looked happy together, comfortable in a way that spoke of years of partnership. And despite everything, despite all the pain and anger and determination that had driven me to this moment, I felt a stab of something that might have been sadness. This was what she'd wanted. This was the life she'd chosen over the one we could have built together. And maybe, just maybe, she'd been right to choose it. But then Marcus said something that made her laugh, and the sound of it, bright and genuine and completely at ease, reminded me of all the times she'd laughed with me. All the moments of joy we'd shared before she decided I wasn't enough. And the sadness transformed into something sharper, more focused. I finished my drink, straightened my tie, and walked across the lobby toward them. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful, like I was walking toward my destiny. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 5 years, the culmination of everything I'd worked for and become. They were standing near the concierge desk, Marcus talking to the staff about some arrangement for their departure the next day. Sarah was checking her phone, probably responding to messages from wedding guests or handling last-minute details. They looked like any other successful couple on vacation, comfortable in their wealth and status. I stopped about 10 feet away and simply stood there, waiting. Sometimes the most powerful move is to do nothing at all, to let your presence speak for itself. I'd learned that in the boardroom, in negotiations with clients who thought they could intimidate me. Stillness could be a weapon. Sarah looked up from her phone, her gaze sweeping the lobby absently. When her eyes met mine, she froze. I saw the moment of recognition, the flash of disbelief, the rapid calculation as she tried to process what she was seeing. Her lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "David?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked up from his conversation with the concierge, following her gaze. When he saw me standing there, his expression shifted from confusion to something that might have been concern. He moved slightly closer to Sarah, a protective gesture that was probably unconscious but spoke volumes about how he saw me, as a threat, an unknown quantity that needed to be managed. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Marcus, congratulations on your wedding." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes taking in the expensive suit, the confidence in my posture, the way I held myself like someone who belonged in places like this. I could see her mind working, trying to reconcile the man standing in front of her with the one she'd left behind. What are you doing here?" she asked finally. "I was in the neighborhood," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "Thought I'd stop by and wish you both well." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus," he said, his grip firm but not aggressive. "I don't believe we've met." "David?" I replied, shaking his hand. "Sarah's former boyfriend." The word former hung in the air between us, loaded with implication. I saw Sarah flinch slightly, as if the casualness of it stung. "Good," I wanted her to feel off balance, to realize that I wasn't the same man who'd once begged her to stay. "David," Marcus said, his voice pleasant but carefully neutral. "Sarah's mentioned you. It's nice to finally meet." I doubted that was true. Sarah had probably mentioned me as little as possible, if at all. But Marcus was playing the role of the gracious husband, the successful man who had nothing to fear from his wife's past. He probably thought I was some sad ex-boyfriend who tracked them down for one last desperate attempt at reconciliation. "How did you know we were here?" Sarah asked, her voice sharper now, more suspicious. "I didn't," I lied smoothly. "I'm here on business. I own a consulting firm now. We specialize in blockchain technology and digital transformation. I'm meeting with some clients on the island tomorrow." It was a plausible story and partially true. I did have clients who might theoretically need to meet in the Caribbean, but I could see Sarah processing this information, trying to understand how the man she left behind had ended up in the same luxury resort as her destination wedding. "That's quite a coincidence," Marcus said, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "The business world is smaller than you might think," I replied, "especially at a certain level." The phrase "certain level" was carefully chosen. It suggested that I operated in the same rarefied circles as Marcus, that I'd earned my place at the table where the truly successful gathered. I saw him stiffen slightly, recognizing the subtle challenge in my words. "What kind of consulting?" Sarah asked, and I could see curiosity warring with suspicion in her expression. "I help Fortune 500 companies implement blockchain solutions," I said. "Digital transformation, supply chain optimization, smart contracts. It's a growing field." "That sounds interesting," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure what I was talking about. Marcus, however, was paying closer attention. "Blockchain is certainly having a moment," he said, "though I wonder about the long-term viability of some of these applications." "It's not about viability," I replied. "It's about inevitability. The companies that adapt will thrive. The ones that don't will become footnotes in business history." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or at least recognition that I wasn't the amateur he'd expected. Marcus might have been successful, but he was fundamentally conservative in his approach to investing. He played with other people's money, managed risk rather than created value. He would never understand the kind of vision that had driven me to build something from nothing. "Well," Sarah said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, "we should probably get back to our guests. The reception is starting soon." "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't want to keep you from your celebration." I turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something. "Oh, Sarah? I should probably mention, I flew in on my own jet. It's quite a feeling, having that kind of freedom. I imagine you'd appreciate it." The words were delivered casually, almost as an afterthought. But I saw their impact immediately. Sarah's eyes widened, and Marcus's expression shifted from polite interest to something harder, more calculating. They both understood what I was really saying, that I'd achieved something that even Marcus, with all his success, couldn't match. "Your own jet?" Sarah repeated, her voice faint. "A Gulfstream G650. I said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I find commercial aviation limiting for my business needs. But I'm sure you understand. At a certain level of success, time becomes your most valuable asset." I let that sink in for a moment, watching as they both processed what I just revealed. Then I smiled, the kind of smile that held no warmth, only satisfaction. "Enjoy your evening," I said. "And congratulations again on finding what you were looking for." I walked away without looking back, my footsteps echoing across the marble floor of the lobby. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of their voices, urgent and confused, as they tried to understand what had just happened. But I didn't need to hear their words to know what they were thinking. Sarah was realizing that the man she'd dismissed as unambitious had built something extraordinary. And Marcus was realizing that his wife's ex-boyfriend had just demonstrated a level of wealth and success that made his own accomplishments look ordinary by comparison. I made my way back to my suite, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The encounter had gone exactly as I'd planned, maybe even better. I delivered my message with surgical precision, leaving them both unsettled and questioning everything they thought they knew about the man Sarah had left behind. But now came the real test. Would this be enough? Would the demonstration of what I'd become satisfy the need for vindication that had driven me for 5 years? Or would it feel hollow like so many other achievements I'd accumulated in my relentless pursuit of success? I poured myself another whiskey and stood at the window, looking out over the ocean. The sun had set completely now, and the water was dark except for the lights of boats moving across the horizon. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain and anger and determination that had transformed me from a broken man into someone who could walk into any room and command respect. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt something that might have been peace. I should have left that night, should have flown back to the mainland, content with the demonstration of power I just delivered. But something kept me rooted to that island, some unfinished business that I couldn't quite name. I told myself it was curiosity. I wanted to see how the rest of their wedding would unfold, whether my presence would cast a shadow over their celebration. But deep down, I knew it was something more primal than that. I wanted to watch them struggle with the knowledge of what I'd become. The hotel had several restaurants, and I chose the most exclusive one for dinner. The maître recognized quality when he saw it. The kind of recognition that money can't buy, but success can earn. I was seated at a prime table with a view of the ocean, and I ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. Not because I needed it, but because I could. Because every small demonstration of wealth was another nail in the coffin of the man Sarah had once dismissed. I was halfway through my appetizer when I saw them enter the restaurant. The wedding reception must have ended, because Sarah had changed out of her wedding dress into a flowing white evening gown that caught the light like liquid moonlight. Marcus wore a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but next to the understated elegance of my own attire, it looked almost trying too hard. They were seated 3 tables away from me, close enough that I could observe their body language, but far enough that I couldn't hear their conversation. Perfect positioning, really. I could see the way Sarah kept glancing in my direction, the way Marcus leaned forward to speak to her in hushed tones. Their romantic dinner was being haunted by the ghost of Sarah's past, and I was enjoying every moment of it. I ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the knowledge that my presence was disrupting their evening. Every time Sarah looked my way, I met her gaze calmly, raising my wine glass slightly in a mock toast. I wasn't being crude or obvious about it. I was simply existing in their space, a reminder of the path not taken and the consequences of her choices. About halfway through their meal, Marcus excused himself, probably to use the restroom or take a phone call. Sarah sat alone at their table, her fingers drumming nervously against the white tablecloth. She looked vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since the night she'd left me. And for a moment, I felt a stab of something that might have been the old affection. Then she stood up and walked over to my table. "David," she said, her voice low and controlled. "May I sit down?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Please." She sat down gracefully, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was prepared to flee at any moment. We stared at each other across the table. 2 people who had once known each other intimately, now separated by years of choices and consequences. "I need to know," she said finally. "Did you really just happen to be here, or did you plan this?" I took a sip of my wine, considering my response. I could lie, maintain the fiction that this was all a coincidence. But where was the satisfaction in that? She deserved to know the truth, or at least part of it. "I planned it," I said simply. Her eyes widened slightly. "You've been watching me?" "I've been aware of you," I corrected. "There's a difference. I know you got married. I know you live in Manhattan. I know Marcus works in finance. But I haven't been stalking you, if that's what you're worried about." She leaned back in her chair, processing this information. "So you came here specifically to, what? Disrupt my wedding? Make some kind of statement?" "I came here to show you something," I said. "To demonstrate what ambition actually looks like when it's coupled with intelligence and determination." "Your jet," she said, and I could hear something in her voice. Not quite admiration, but a recognition of what that represented. "My jet, my company, my life. The life I built after you told me I wasn't ambitious enough for you." She was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "You've changed," she said finally. "I had to," I replied. "The man you left behind was weak, content with mediocrity. You were right to leave him, but you were wrong about what he was capable of becoming." "David, she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not here for an apology," I said. "I'm not here to win you back or to disrupt your marriage. I'm here because I wanted you to see what you walked away from, what you could have had if you'd been patient enough to let me find my potential." "You're angry," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I was angry," I corrected, "for a long time. Angry at you, angry at myself, Angry at the world for not recognizing what I had to offer. But anger is just fuel, Sarah. What matters is what you do with it. She glanced back toward their table, where Marcus was returning from wherever he'd gone. I should go, she said, starting to stand. Should you? I asked. Or do you have more questions you want to ask? She hesitated, caught between curiosity and loyalty to her husband. This isn't fair, she said. You can't just show up here and turn my life upside down. I haven't turned anything upside down, I said. I've simply shown you a different perspective. What you do with that information is up to you. Marcus had reached their table and was looking in our direction with obvious concern. I could see him calculating whether to come over and interrupt or to wait for Sarah to return on her own. He's worried, I observed. He should be, not because of anything I might do, but because of what I represent. The life you could have had with someone who was willing to risk everything to become worthy of you. Stop, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm not trying to hurt you, Sarah. I'm trying to show you the difference between the kind of success Marcus has and the kind I've built. He's successful because he's good at managing other people's money. I'm successful because I created something from nothing, because I saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. You're trying to make me doubt my choices, she said. I'm trying to make you understand what your choices cost, I replied. Not just for me, but for you. You settled for safe, Sarah. You chose the known quantity over the unknown potential. And maybe that was the right choice for you, but I wanted you to see what the alternative looked like. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict playing out in her expression. Part of her was intrigued by what I'd become, curious about the path her life might have taken. But another part, the part that had chosen stability over risk, was frightened by the implications of my success. I need to go, she said, standing abruptly. Marcus is waiting. Of course, I said, rising politely. Enjoy the rest of your evening. She walked back to their table without looking back, but I could see the tension in her movements, the way she held herself like someone who'd just received disturbing news. Marcus stood when she approached, his eyes flicking between her and me as he tried to read the situation. I finished my dinner alone, watching them out of the corner of my eye. Their conversation was animated but hushed, and I could see Sarah shaking her head repeatedly, as if denying something Marcus was suggesting. He kept glancing in my direction, and I could almost hear his questions. Who is this guy? What does he want? Why is he really here? They left the restaurant before I finished my meal, Marcus's hand possessively on Sarah's lower back as they walked past my table. Neither of them looked at me, but I could feel the weight of their awareness, the way my presence had shifted the dynamic of their evening. I ordered dessert and another glass of wine, taking my time. I had nowhere else to be, no urgent business to attend to. For the first time in years, I was allowing myself to simply exist in the moment, to savor the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. But as I sat there watching the other diners enjoy their romantic meals, I felt something unexpected. Emptiness. The confrontation I'd been planning for 5 years had lasted maybe 15 minutes. The demonstration of my success had been acknowledged, the point had been made, and now, what? I'd proven that Sarah had underestimated me, that her dismissal of my potential had been short-sighted. But the victory felt hollow, like winning a game that no one else was playing. I paid the check and made my way back to my suite, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The room was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, luxury furnishings that spoke of understated wealth, every amenity a successful person could want. But it felt like a museum exhibit, a display of success without substance. I poured myself a drink from the minibar and stood at the window looking out at the dark water. The lights of other boats dotted the horizon, each one carrying people living their own lives, pursuing their own dreams, making their own choices. I thought about the path that had brought me here, the years of focused determination that had transformed me from a broken man into someone who could afford to charter a private jet just to make a point. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I wondered if it might be Sarah, if our conversation had affected her enough to reach out. But it was just my assistant, confirming details for a meeting the following week. Business as usual, the endless cycle of success that had become my life. I was about to turn away from the window when I saw a movement on the beach below. 2 figures walking along the shoreline, their feet in the sand, their silhouettes unmistakable in the moonlight. Sarah and Marcus, taking a romantic walk on what should have been one of the happiest nights of their lives. But even from this distance, I could see the tension in their body language. They weren't walking hand in hand like lovers. They were walking side by side like negotiators, their conversation clearly serious. Every few steps, one of them would stop and turn to face the other, gesturing animatedly. It was the kind of conversation that couples have when something fundamental has been disrupted, when the ground beneath their relationship has shifted. I watched them for nearly an hour, fascinated by the drama playing out below. Eventually, they made their way back toward the hotel, but even then, I could see the distance between them, the way they moved like two people who were together but not truly connected. I slept poorly that night, my dreams filled with fragments of memory and imagination. I dreamed of the apartment Sarah and I had shared, of the life we might have built together if she'd been patient enough to let me find my potential. I dreamed of boardrooms and private jets, of the endless pursuit of more that had defined my existence for the past 5 years. I dreamed of standing on a beach, watching two figures walk away from me into the darkness. When I woke, the sun was already high in the sky. I'd slept later than I had in months, my body finally relaxing after years of relentless drive. I ordered room service and ate breakfast on the balcony, watching the hotel staff prepare the beach for another day of luxury tourism. I was supposed to fly back to the mainland that morning, but something made me postpone my departure. I told myself it was the perfect weather, the appeal of a few more hours in paradise. But really, I wanted to see how the aftermath of my appearance would play out. I wanted to witness the consequences of the stone I'd thrown into the still waters of their perfect life. I spent the morning by the pool, reading business journals and answering emails, the kind of work that could be done anywhere, that didn't require my physical presence in any particular location. It was one of the benefits of the life I'd built, the freedom to work from anywhere, to make decisions that affected millions of dollars while lounging in a deck chair beside a Caribbean pool. I was deep in a report about emerging markets when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Excuse me." I turned to find Marcus standing there, still handsome in his casual resort wear, but looking like he hadn't slept well. There were dark circles under his eyes and his usual confident bearing seemed forced. "Marcus," I said, setting down my tablet. "Good morning. May I sit down?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside mine. "Please." He sat down heavily like a man carrying a burden he wasn't sure how to handle. For a moment, we sat in silence. Two successful men beside a luxury pool, each waiting for the other to make the first move. "I want to talk to you about Sarah," he said finally. "Well, what about her? About what you're trying to do here? About why you really came?" I studied his face, seeing the calculation behind his eyes. Marcus was a financial professional, someone who understood risk and reward, who made his living by reading between the lines of market data. He wasn't stupid and he wasn't naive. He'd figured out more than I'd expected. "I told you why I came," I said. "Business." "Bullshit," he said, but without heat. "You came here to fuck with our heads, to show Sarah what she gave up, to prove some kind of point about success and ambition." I couldn't help but smile. "You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for." "I'm good at reading people," he said. "It's part of my job, and I can see what you're doing, even if Sarah can't." "What am I doing, Marcus?" "You're playing a long game. You've spent 5 years building something impressive, and now you want to cash in that success for validation. You want Sarah to regret leaving you, to question her choices, to wonder what might have been. And if I am, then you're pathetic," he said, but again without malice. "You're a successful man who's still defined by the opinion of a woman who left you half a decade ago. You've built an empire, but you're still that broken guy sitting on his couch, wondering why he wasn't good enough." His words hit harder than I'd expected, partly because there was truth in them. I'd spent 5 years telling myself I was building something meaningful, creating value, becoming the man I was meant to be. But underneath all of that, hadn't I really been building a monument to my own wounded pride? "Maybe," I said, "but I'm a pathetic man who owns a Gulfstream G650. Marcus laughed, a sound that held no humor. "You think that matters? You think Sarah gives a shit about your jet?" "I think Sarah gives a shit about what that jet represents. About the kind of man who can afford to buy one just to make a point." You're wrong," he said. "Sarah fell in love with me because I could give her stability, security, a life she could count on. She didn't leave you because you weren't successful enough. She left you because you weren't reliable enough." "Reliable?" I felt a flash of anger. I was completely reliable. I was there every day working my ass off, building a life for us. "You were building a life for yourself," he interrupted. "Sarah was just expected to go along with it. You never asked her what she wanted, never considered that maybe she had her own ambitions, her own dreams. You just assumed she'd be happy with whatever you provided. I stared at him, feeling something shift inside my chest. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked Sarah what she wanted to do with her life? When was the last time you supported her dreams instead of expecting her to support yours? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I couldn't answer it. Not honestly. In all my years with Sarah, I'd seen her as a partner in the life I was building, not as someone building her own life who might have different goals and aspirations. She wanted ambition, I said, but the words sounded weak even to me. She wanted partnership. Marcus corrected. She wanted someone who saw her as an equal, not as an accessory to his success. And maybe you could have given her that eventually, but she couldn't wait around to find out. So she chose you. She chose me because I listened to her, because I asked her about her dreams and then helped her achieve them, because I saw her as more than just a beautiful woman who would look good next to my success. I felt something crumbling inside me, some carefully constructed narrative that had driven me for 5 years. All this time, I thought Sarah had left me because I wasn't ambitious enough, because I couldn't give her the lifestyle she wanted. But what if Marcus was right? What if she'd left because I'd never really seen her as anything more than a supporting character in my own story? She's happy, Marcus continued, genuinely happy. She has a career she loves, friends who respect her, a life that's meaningful to her. And yes, she has financial security too. But that's not why she stayed with me. She stayed because I made her feel valued for who she is, not just for what she could contribute to my success. And you think I didn't do that? I think you tried to, he said, and there was something almost kind in his voice. I think you loved her in your own way, but you loved the idea of her more than you loved the reality of who she was. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling over me like a shroud. Around us, other hotel guests were enjoying their tropical vacation, laughing and swimming and living in the moment. But I felt like I was in a bubble, separate from their joy, grappling with truths I'd spent 5 years avoiding. Ha ha ha, why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Because I want you to leave, he said simply. Not because I'm threatened by you, but because you're hurting yourself. You've built something incredible, David. You should be proud of what you've accomplished. But you're never going to be happy if you keep measuring your success by Sarah's reaction to it. What if I don't want to leave? Then you'll stay, and you'll probably find more opportunities to demonstrate your wealth and success. Maybe you'll make Sarah doubt her choices. Maybe you'll even convince her to leave me. But what then? Do you really think you could build a meaningful relationship with someone whose love you had to earn through intimidation and manipulation? I stared out at the ocean, watching the waves roll endlessly toward the shore. Each one was different, but they all followed the same pattern. Building, cresting, crashing, then retreating to build again. Like the cycles of success and failure, ambition and achievement, that had defined my adult life. I don't know, I admitted. Then figure it out, Marcus said, standing up. But do it somewhere else. Let Sarah be happy. Let yourself be happy. Stop defining your worth by what happened 5 years ago. He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the uncomfortable realization that maybe he was right. Maybe I had spent 5 years building a monument to my own wounded pride, achieving incredible success, but never finding the satisfaction that should have come with it. I spent the rest of the day walking the beach, thinking about the conversation and what it meant for the narrative I'd constructed about my life. I'd told myself that I was driven by ambition, by the desire to build something meaningful, to become the man I was meant to be. But underneath all of that, wasn't I really just trying to prove that Sarah had been wrong about me? And if that was true, then what did it say about everything I'd accomplished? Was my success real, or was it just an elaborate form of self-deception? As the sun began to set, I made my way back to the hotel. I had a decision to make. I could stay and continue whatever game I'd started, or I could leave and try to find a different way to define my worth. The smart move, the mature move, was obviously to leave. But I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of the story I'd been telling myself for 5 years. I was walking through the lobby when I saw them again. Sarah and Marcus, dressed for dinner, standing near the restaurant entrance. They were talking quietly, their heads close together, and there was something intimate about their body language that made my chest tighten. Then Sarah looked up and saw me. Our eyes met across the crowded lobby, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. I saw something in her expression, not longing, not regret, but something that might have been pity. And in that moment, I understood what Marcus had been trying to tell me. She didn't miss me. She didn't regret leaving me. She felt sorry for me, for the man who had achieved everything and still needed her approval to feel successful. I walked over to them, my decision made. "Sarah," I said. "Marcus, I wanted to apologize." They both looked surprised, but Marcus recovered first. "Apologize for what?" "For disrupting your celebration. For making this about me instead of about you. For letting my own issues interfere with your happiness." Sarah studied my face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. "David, I'm leaving," I said. "Tonight, I came here to prove something to you, to show you what you'd given up. But I realize now that what I was really trying to do was prove something to myself. And that's not your responsibility. You don't have to leave," she said, though I could hear the relief in her voice. "Yes, I do," I said. "Marcus is right. I've spent 5 years building something incredible, but I've been measuring its value by the wrong metrics. I need to figure out what success means to me, not what it means to you." Marcus extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I'm impressed by what you've accomplished. And I think you're making the right choice." I shook his hand, feeling something like respect for the man who had been secure enough to confront me directly. "Take care of her," I said. "I will." I turned to Sarah, memorizing her face one last time. She was beautiful, successful, happy. Everything I'd once thought I needed to be complete. But I could see now that she was also just a person, someone who had made choices that were right for her, but not necessarily right for me. "I'm sorry," I said, "for all of it, for not seeing you clearly when we were together, for not supporting your dreams, for showing up here and trying to disrupt your life. You deserve better than that." She looked surprised, then something that might have been gratitude flickered in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know. Be happy," I said. Both of you." I walked away without looking back, my footsteps echoing across the marble floor. But this time it felt different. This time I wasn't walking away from something I'd lost. I was walking towards something I might find. I spent the next hour packing my things and preparing for departure. The hotel staff was efficient and professional, arranging ground transportation to the airport without question. They'd probably seen this kind of thing before. Wealthy guests who changed their plans on a whim, who treated travel like a casual decision rather than a major undertaking. The flight back to the mainland was smooth, the controls of the Gulf Stream familiar and comforting under my hands. I flew through the night, watching the lights of cities pass below me, thinking about the conversation with Marcus and what it meant for my future. He'd been right about one thing. I'd spent 5 years building something incredible, but I'd been measuring its value by Sarah's reaction to it. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of success had been filtered through the lens of what she'd think about it. I'd become successful, but I'd never become independent. When I landed back home, the sun was rising over the city skyline. I taxied the jet to its hangar, shut down the engines, and sat in the cockpit for a long moment, watching the ground crew prepare for the day ahead. This was my life now. Private jets and luxury hangars, the kind of success that most people could only dream of. But for the first time in years, I was asking myself what I really wanted to do with it. I drove home to my house in the hills, the city spread out below me like a circuit board of light and possibility. The house was exactly as I'd left it, perfectly appointed, professionally cleaned, a monument to my success. But it felt empty, like a museum exhibit of a life, rather than a place where someone actually lived. I made coffee and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, millions of people were starting their days, pursuing their own dreams, building their own versions of success. And for the first time in 5 years, I wondered what my life would look like if I stopped trying to prove something to a woman who had moved on without me. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was my assistant, calling about the meeting I'd missed, the clients who were waiting for decisions, the business that continued to operate whether I was physically present or not. "Cancel everything for today," I said. "I need some time to think." "Sir, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I said, and realized I meant it. "I just need to recalibrate some things." I spent the day walking through my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. The art on the walls, the expensive furniture, the gadgets and toys that successful people were supposed to want. It was all beautiful, all perfectly curated, all completely soulless. I found myself in my home office, looking at the framed photos on my desk. There was one of me accepting an award from a trade association, another of me at a charity gala, a third of me shaking hands with a senator at some political fundraiser. But there were no personal photos, no pictures of friends or family or moments of genuine joy. My success had become my identity, but it had also become my prison. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my parents. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice surprised but pleased to hear from me. "David, how are you, honey? We haven't heard from you in weeks." "I'm fine, Mom. I was just thinking about you and Dad, wondering how you're doing." "We're good, sweetheart. Your father's been working in the garden, and I've been volunteering at the library. Nothing too exciting, but we're happy." Happy. Such a simple word, but it hit me like a revelation. When was the last time I'd been happy? Really, genuinely happy, not just satisfied with an achievement or vindicated by a success? I couldn't remember. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey. Do you think I'm a good person?" There was a pause and I could hear her thinking, "What kind of question is that?" "Of course you're a good person. You're successful, you're intelligent, you work hard." "That's not what I mean," I interrupted. "I mean, as a person, as a human being. Do you think I'm kind? Do you think I care about other people? Do you think I'm someone you'd want to be friends with if you weren't related to me?" Another pause, longer this time. "David, what's brought this on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No, Mom, I'm not in trouble. I've been thinking about what kind of life I'm living, what kind of person I've become, and I'm not sure I like the answers." "Honey, you've accomplished so much. You should be proud of what you've built." "I am proud," I said, "but I'm also wondering if I've built the right things, if I've become the right kind of person." We talked for another hour about nothing and everything, about my childhood, about the dreams I'd had before success became my only goal, about the kind of person I'd wanted to be before I got caught up in the need to prove myself. It was the longest conversation I'd had with my mother in years, and by the end of it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: connection. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about the choices I'd made and the life I'd built. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to achieve and more. I was wealthy, successful, respected in my field. But I was also alone, driven by motivations I was no longer sure I understood, measuring my worth by standards that had nothing to do with who I actually was. The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few days earlier. I called my assistant and told her to clear my schedule for the week. Then I called my lawyer and told him to start drawing up papers for a charitable foundation. I was going to give away half of my wealth, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because I wanted to see if I could find meaning in something other than accumulation. It took months to work out all the details, to decide which causes to support and how to structure the giving. But with each decision, I felt something shifting inside me. The weight of constantly having to prove myself was lifting, replaced by something lighter, but somehow more substantial. I started small, funding scholarships for underprivileged students, supporting local food banks, investing in programs that help people start their own businesses. But as the foundation grew, so did my understanding of what success could really mean. It wasn't about accumulating wealth or demonstrating power. It was about using whatever resources you had to make the world a little bit better. I thought about Sarah sometimes, but differently now. I wondered if she was happy, if she and Marcus were building something meaningful together. I hoped they were. I hoped she'd found the partnership she'd been looking for. The sense of being valued for who she was rather than what she could contribute to someone else's success. And gradually I began to understand that Marcus had been right about something else too. I had loved the idea of Sarah more than I'd loved the reality of who she was. I'd been so focused on what I wanted our relationship to be that I'd never really seen what she needed it to be. 6 months after my return from the Caribbean, I was in my office working on a proposal for a new education initiative when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She says she's an old friend." I looked up from my computer, curious. I didn't have many old friends. Success had a way of pruning your social circle down to business associates and professional contacts. "Send her in," I said. The door opened and Sarah walked into my office. She looked different than she had at the resort. More professional, more confident, but also somehow more relaxed. She was wearing a simple but elegant dress that spoke of understated success, and her hair was shorter, more mature. But her eyes were the same green I remembered, and they were studying me with the same intensity that had once made my heart race. "Hello, David," she said. "Sarah." I stood up, gesturing to the chairs in front of my desk. "Please, sit down. This is..." Unexpected. She sat down, crossing her legs and looking around the office. Nice place. Very impressive. Thank you. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? I'm fine, she said. I hope you don't mind me just showing up like this. I tried calling, but your assistant said you were in meetings all week. I'm always in meetings, I said, sitting back down. It's one of the downsides of success. What brings you to town? Business, actually. My firm is expanding into this market, and I'm leading the advanced team. I'll be here for a few months, setting up the new office. Congratulations. That sounds like a big opportunity. It is, she said, and I could hear the pride in her voice. I'm nervous but excited. It's the kind of challenge I've been working toward for years. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had once been intimate now navigating the strange territory of professional courtesy. I studied her face, looking for signs of the woman I'd once known. The woman I'd spent 5 years trying to prove myself to. I wanted to thank you, she said finally. For what? For what you said at the resort. For apologizing. For seeing me clearly, maybe for the first time. I felt something shift in my chest. I owed you that apology. I should have given it to you 5 years ago. Maybe, she said, but I'm not sure I would have been ready to hear it 5 years ago. I was so focused on what I wanted, on where I was going, that I didn't really consider how my choices affected you. Your choices were right for you, I said. That's what matters. Were they? She asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice. I mean, I'm happy with my life. I love my work. I have a good marriage. I'm building something meaningful. But sometimes I wonder if I handled things with you the right way. If I could have been kinder, more patient. I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. You were honest with me about what you needed. That was the kindest thing you could have done. Was it? Or was I just taking the easy way out? Choosing the known quantity over the unknown potential? I thought about my conversation with Marcus, about the truths he'd forced me to confront. Maybe both, I said, but that doesn't make it wrong. You had to make decisions based on who I was then, not who I might become. And look who you became, she said, gesturing around the office. This is incredible, David. You built something amazing. I built something successful, I corrected. I'm still working on making it amazing. She tilted her head, studying me. What do you mean? I told her about the foundation, about the decision to give away half my wealth, about the shift in how I thought about success and meaning. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, engaging with the ideas in a way that reminded me of our best conversations from years ago. That's beautiful, she said when I finished. It sounds like you found something that really matters to you. I'm trying to, I said. For years, I was building something impressive, but I wasn't sure why. Now I'm trying to build something useful. I think that's the difference between success and fulfillment. She said, success is about what you achieve. Fulfillment is about what you contribute. We talked for another hour about her work, about my foundation, about the paths we'd taken since leaving each other. It was the kind of conversation I'd always imagined having with her. Deep, meaningful, respectful of who we'd both become. As she was getting ready to leave, she paused at the door. David? For what it's worth, I think you're going to be fine. More than fine. I think you're going to be happy. I hope so, I said. I'm certainly working on it. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it meant. There had been no drama, no lingering tension, no sense of unfinished business. Just two people who had once been important to each other, checking in on how life had treated them. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt truly free. Free from the need to prove myself to her, free from the anger and hurt that had driven me for so long, free to define success by my own standards rather than by her reaction to my achievements. I thought about the private jet sitting in its hangar, about the house in the hills, about all the symbols of success I'd accumulated in my quest to show her what she'd given up. They were still impressive, still valuable, still markers of genuine achievement. But they were no longer the most important things in my life. The most important thing was the work I was doing now, using my resources to help other people build their own versions of success, to create opportunities for those who hadn't been born with the advantages I'd had. It was harder work than building wealth, more complex than managing a business, but it was also more satisfying than anything I'd ever done. That evening, I had dinner with my parents for the first time in months. We talked about the foundation, about my plans for the future, about the kind of life I wanted to build going forward. My mother kept looking at me with something that might have been wonder, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You seem different," she said as we were clearing the dishes. "Happier." "I think I am," I said. "I'm definitely more focused on the right things." What changed?" my father asked. I thought about it for a moment. I stopped trying to prove I was someone I wasn't and started trying to become someone I could be proud of. "That's a good lesson," he said. "Took me about 40 years to learn it myself." As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not the satisfaction of a deal closed or a goal achieved, but the quiet contentment of knowing that I was living authentically, that my actions were aligned with my values, that I was building something that would matter beyond my own ego. The house still felt empty when I got home, but it didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt like a place I was living rather than a monument to my success. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the windows, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Sarah was building her new office, creating opportunities for her team, contributing to something larger than herself. Marcus was probably at home, reading or working on his own projects, secure in the knowledge that he'd chosen well and been chosen well in return. And here I was, finally free from the need to measure my worth by their standards, finally able to define success by my own metrics. I had wealth, but I was learning to use it wisely. I had power, but I was learning to use it responsibly. I had achieved everything I'd set out to achieve, but more importantly, I was beginning to understand what I wanted to achieve next. The private jet was still in its hangar, ready to take me anywhere I wanted to go. But I was no longer running from something or trying to prove something. I was simply living, building, contributing, becoming. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like enough. 3 months later, I was in my office reviewing applications for the Foundation's new entrepreneur program when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's a call for you," she said. "A Marcus Chen. He says you'll know what it's about." I felt a moment of surprise, then curiosity. I hadn't spoken to Marcus since that morning by the pool in the Caribbean, but I'd thought about our conversation many times since then. He'd been right about a lot of things, and I'd always wondered if he knew how much his words had affected me. "Put him through," I said. The call connected, and I heard his familiar voice. "David, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," I said. "How are you, Marcus?" "I'm well, thank you. I'm calling because I have a business proposition for you, if you're interested." "I'm listening." "I've been following your foundation's work," he said. "The entrepreneur program, the education initiatives, the small business loans. It's impressive work, and I think there might be opportunities for collaboration." "What kind of collaboration?" "My firm is looking to expand our impact investing portfolio. We want to put capital behind companies and initiatives that generate both financial returns and social impact. Your foundation has identified some promising opportunities, and we'd like to explore ways to work together." I leaned back in my chair, intrigued. "That's interesting. What did you have in mind?" We talked for an hour about potential partnerships, about ways to leverage both his financial expertise and my foundation's community connections. It was a productive conversation, the kind of strategic discussion that I'd always enjoyed, but with a purpose that felt more meaningful than profit alone. "There's something else," Marcus said as we were wrapping up. "Sarah mentioned that you stopped by her office a few months ago. She said you seemed different, more grounded." "I hope so," I said. "I've been working on it. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing with the foundation is remarkable. It takes courage to change direction like that, to redefine what success means." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot coming from you." "I should also mention," he said, "Sarah and I are expecting our first child." I felt a complex mix of emotions, a brief stab of something that might have been regret, followed by genuine happiness for them both. "Congratulations," I said. "That's wonderful news." "Thank you. We're very excited. It's made us both think about the kind of world we want to leave behind, the kind of legacy we want to build." "I imagine it has," I said. "Children have a way of clarifying what's really important." "Exactly. Which is part of why I wanted to talk to you about this partnership. I think we could do some real good together." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation and what it represented. 5 years ago, Marcus had been my rival, the symbol of everything I wasn't but thought I needed to become. Now he was potentially my partner, someone whose skills and resources could help amplify the work I was trying to do. It was a strange kind of closure, this evolution from antagonism to collaboration. But it also felt right. like the natural progression of people who had moved beyond their original roles in each other's stories. I called my assistant and asked her to set up a meeting with my foundation's board. If we were going to explore this partnership, I wanted to make sure it aligned with our mission and values. I wanted to make sure we were building something that would last, something that would matter beyond the personalities involved. That afternoon, I found myself back at the hangar where my jet was stored. I hadn't flown it in weeks, partly because I'd been busy with the foundation, but partly because I didn't feel the same need to escape, to run from one city to another in pursuit of the next achievement. The aircraft was beautiful, a masterpiece of engineering and design. But as I stood there looking at it, I realized it had become something different to me. It was no longer a symbol of my success or a tool for demonstrating my wealth. It was simply a resource, a means of transportation that could help me do my work more effectively. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. I was going to sell the jet and use the proceeds to fund the foundation's work. I didn't need to own an aircraft to be successful, and the money could do more good in the hands of people who were building their own paths to success. It took 2 months to arrange the sale, to find a buyer who would appreciate what the aircraft represented. But when I finally signed the paperwork and watched the new owner take possession, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. I was free from the need to maintain symbols of my success, free to focus on the work that actually mattered. The foundation's work continued to grow. We funded dozens of small businesses, provided scholarships to hundreds of students, and supported community programs in cities across the country. It was challenging work, more complex than anything I'd done in the corporate world, but it was also more rewarding. I started traveling more, not in my private jet, but on commercial flights, visiting the communities and businesses we were supporting. I wanted to understand the impact of our work, to see how the resources we provided were being used, to learn from the people we were trying to help. It was during one of these trips that I met Elena. She was running a nonprofit in Detroit, working to revitalize abandoned neighborhoods through urban agriculture and community development. She'd applied for a grant from the foundation, and I'd come to visit her operation and see the work firsthand. She was everything I hadn't known I was looking for: intelligent, passionate, committed to something larger than herself. She was also unimpressed by my wealth, my success, or my foundation. She cared about what we could do together, not what I had accomplished on my own. We worked together for months, developing a partnership that would bring resources and expertise to her community. But gradually, our professional relationship evolved into something more personal. She challenged me in ways that no one had since Sarah, but she also supported me in ways that I'd never experienced. The relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than attraction to success or lifestyle. She had her own life, her own work, her own sense of purpose. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her or provide for her. She was looking for someone to build something with. We'd been together for almost a year when she said something that stopped me cold. "You know what I love about you?" she said. We were sitting in her kitchen, sharing a simple dinner after a long day of work. "What?" "You're not trying to impress me. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just being yourself." I realized she was right. For the first time in my adult life, I was in a relationship where I didn't feel the need to constantly demonstrate my worth. I was enough exactly as I was. "I haven't always been like this," I said. "I know," she said, "but you are now, and that's what matters." 2 years later, I proposed to her, not with an expensive ring or an elaborate gesture, but with a simple question asked in the garden she'd helped create in one of Detroit's most challenging neighborhoods. She said yes, and I felt a happiness that had nothing to do with achievement or validation. Our wedding was small, intimate, focused on the people who mattered most to us. My parents were there, of course, along with Elena's family and friends from the community we'd been working in. It was everything my relationship with Sarah had never been: grounded, authentic, built on who we actually were rather than who we thought we should be. Sarah sent a congratulations card, along with a photo of her daughter and a note saying she was happy for us both. It was a kind gesture, and I was genuinely touched by it. But more than that, I was grateful for the role she'd played in my life, for the painful lessons she'd taught me about the difference between success and fulfillment. Marcus and I had become real partners in the impact investing venture, which had grown into one of the most successful funds of its kind. We worked well together, our different perspectives and skills complementing each other in ways that neither of us could have achieved alone. The foundation continued to grow, supporting hundreds of entrepreneurs and thousands of students. But more importantly, it had become something that would outlast me, something that would continue to create opportunities long after I was gone. I still lived in the house in the hills, but Elena had transformed it from a monument to my success into a home where we could build a life together. The expensive art was still there, but it was joined by her books, her plants, her photographs of the communities we worked in. We talked about having children, about the kind of world we wanted to leave behind, about the legacy we wanted to build together. It was the kind of conversation I'd once imagined having with Sarah, but it felt completely different now, grounded in reality rather than fantasy, focused on what we could build together rather than what we could prove to others. 5 years after my confrontation with Sarah at the Caribbean resort, I was a different person. I was still successful, still wealthy, still driven, but I was driven by purpose rather than pride, by contribution rather than accumulation, by love rather than the need to prove myself. The private jet was gone, but I had something much more valuable, a life that I was proud of, work that mattered, and relationships that were built on who I actually was rather than what I had achieved. I thought about the man I'd been when Sarah left me, broken and desperate and convinced that he wasn't enough. He'd been right about one thing: he wasn't enough, but not because he lacked ambition or success or wealth. He wasn't enough because he didn't know who he was or what he wanted beyond the approval of others. The man I'd become was enough, not because of what he'd achieved, but because of who he'd chosen to become. He'd learned to measure his worth by his own standards, to define success by his contribution to the world, to build relationships based on authenticity rather than performance. Looking back, I realized that Sarah had done me a favor by leaving. She'd forced me to confront the truth about myself, to acknowledge the ways I'd been living for others rather than for myself. She'd given me the opportunity to become the man I was meant to be, even if it took me 5 years to understand what that meant. The revenge I'd planned had been perfect in its execution, but hollow in its satisfaction. The real victory hadn't been showing her what she'd given up. It had been learning to stop needing her validation in the first place. As I sat in my office that afternoon, reviewing proposals for the foundation's next round of investments, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete contentment. Not the satisfaction of a goal achieved or a point proven, but the quiet contentment of a life well lived. I was building something that would outlast me, contributing to causes that mattered, loving someone who saw me clearly and valued me for who I was. I was enough, exactly as I was, and I finally understood what that meant. The private jet was gone, but I had found something much more valuable: myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest success of all.